Okay, we'll get her cranked up here. Thank you everyone for coming. We've got Representative Gary Worthen and Senator Mark Segabar. We'll do some opening comments and then take questions from you, so take her away.
Well, I'll start, Steve and Gary can finish, but great to be here this morning. It's always great to get where you want to go on time. So, had another productive week this last week in the Senate. Lots of bills coming out of committees now, and most of the committees I sit on now are human resources, which is health and human service, and the budgets for health and human service. So we've been meeting every day for a couple hours on those and dealing with all types of human service problems. LIHEAP, the low-income heating and assistance program that helps the low-income people pay their heating bills during the winter was a big issue this week, and it passed through the Senate, or out of the committee at least. Yeah, it'll probably come up next week. It's out of committee now, but it will add $2 million to those emergency heating funds. And the other part of the good news was, I think, we received another large installment from the federal government on our LIHEAP program. So there should be funds out there for people facing exorbitant propane prices right now. So they're kind of all over the place depending on the day of the week. So that should be helpful for those folks. We also had actual bills through the Senate this week. The major one, of course, was the allowable growth and categorical growth for school aid. That passed through the Senate on Wednesday at 6% for the school year of 15-16. The next year was set last year by the budget at 4%. So we know that next year would be 4%. What we're talking about, a school year actually 2 years out or from here, and it passed in the Senate at 6%. So we'll see how that goes. The other part of what was passed last week was also tax replacement for those the property tax that goes along with the school aid. That also kind of tags along and goes up when you raise allowable growth. Well, last year we moved to backfill that, so your property taxes wouldn't go up, but we did the same again this year. So state will help pay the property taxes that otherwise would come along with it. So those are a couple of big things that happened last week. And on Wednesday we had a visit from the Adjutant General of the National Guard of Iowa, and I'm sure Gary will want to talk about that a little bit, but he had some pretty amazing things to say. I guess what stands out in my mind that this is the first time in 12 years that all the Iowa combat forces are back home. And the only ones that remain out there were about 100 members of the 132nd Air National Guard that were still deployed around the world, actually. And he said that the Air Guard was going to have a significant change right now, and that would be that they will no longer have F-16s flying out of Des Moines, Iowa, and that they were going to change their focus to more in the area, and actually 3 other areas, but he mentioned drones was going to be one of them. So I guess you'll be seeing stuff flying around Des Moines for a while yet. But the other part was on the F-16s. It was a maintenance crew out of Des Moines that did repairs on F-16s, and they were so well trained there that they were going to continue to do that function there in Des Moines. So you may still see planes flying in and out for their routine maintenance there. So, he said there was a lot of change occurring now. Probably, he said, more change occurring in the National Guard for Iowa than there's been since the end of World War II. So a lot of stuff going on, and it's great to have them all back home for the time being. So other than that, that's kind of my week, and come over here.
Thanks, Mark. Nice crowd here this morning. Thanks everybody for coming out on not the most pleasant morning that we've had. But, not a lot going on the surface in the house. There's a lot of things going on, kind of, you don't see and you don't hear a whole lot about. Concentrating on subcommittee work. Of course, the bill has to come out of subcommittee, go to a full standing committee, policy committee, before it can come to the floor. We'll start debating some bills on the floor next week. And we've got a funnel here in 2 weeks, be the 21st, I think, is the first funnel where a bill at least has to be out of committee in one chamber or the other for it to survive for the year. Haven't got a definitive answer. Thursday night or Thursday afternoon, there was a subcommittee meeting on the telemedicine bill. I'm assuming that has come out of subcommittee. That's one of the more contentious bills that we'll do this year, I'm assuming. And how, it's the minority's prerogative. The rule of thumb is that the majority controls the agenda and the minority controls the clock. And so the normal procedure is for the minority to amend and string out committee hearings and subcommittee hearings and so on. So I don't know how long that committee meeting took the other night, but I'm assuming that bill came out of subcommittee and will be in full Health and Human Services Committee shortly. As I left Thursday afternoon, there was a committee meeting on drones in the House. To put some parameters on that, the law enforcement agency is going to have a warrant to use a drone to, try and observe your backyard or whatever. Hover outside your window and look in your house. So they're going to have a warrant to do those types of things. This is a whole new area. There's an awful lot of excitement in the ag community about these drones that you can hang an infrared camera or some type of a sensor on a drone, and in the space of about an hour and a half, you can inspect a quarter section of corn, and if you see a spot shows up, something on the infrared, that's 10 foot across, you can then hike in and determine whether it's a disease, whether it's a fungus, what's happening there. Maybe it's a fertilizer issue or something awful. So, there's going to be an awful lot of discussion over the next couple, 3 years, I think, about the use of drones and how do we regulate them and how do we allow them to be used to their best advantage in agriculture and many other uses as far as that's concerned. Not this last week, but the week before, we did have a subcommittee hearing in the House on the fuel tax, on Iowa's fuel tax. The proposal for the House is the same one that it was a couple years ago, or last year and the year before. It's a 10-cent increase phased in over 3 years, 3 cents the first, 3 cents the second, 4 cents the third. That's, I think a couple of you were there. That room got just a titch stuffy and warm before that committee hearing was over. It was one of the largest committee rooms we have in the House, and it was standing room. And the amazing thing to me was, of course, it was Transportation Day on the Hill. There were a lot of county supervisors there, a lot of county engineers. Highway 20 Association was there. I think Highway 30 Association was there. So a lot of people that were in favor, of course, and they all had their say, and the committee chairman made a specific effort to ask if anyone was opposed to the fuel tax. And I know for a fact that there are 2 taxpayer organizations that were represented in the room, but neither one of them had the temerity to say a word. So, that's something, that tells me something. There is a fair amount of support out there. But it goes by region, goes by location. A colleague whose district encompasses it, he's urban Ankeny, and he says his forums are 80% against a fuel tax increase. So, we've got those things to work through. Don't anticipate a whole lot happening this year on the fuel tax. Unfortunately, you get into the politics, and the politics aren't looking real good right at the moment as far as a fuel tax increase. But to me, it seems to be the only fair way to fund our roads. Everybody that uses the road to pay. As I said in the committee hearing that day, I'm back on transportation committee now. I've been off for a year, and it's kind of frustrating to me as being in the trucking business, and we go east from here. We're paying 22 cents a gallon on diesel fuel here in the state of Iowa. You go into Illinois, and it's 43 cents a gallon. You go into Indiana and Ohio, they're both at 28 cents a gallon, but you also get to pay their tolls. It's been a while since I've been that way, gone that way, but I think, the tolls across Indiana are something like $30, and across Ohio are probably 40 on top of the fuel tax. So we need to take care of our infrastructure. And that's all there is to it. Anyone in business knows that you don't service, you don't maintain the combine or the tractor. By the middle of the season, it goes down, and then you're kind of out of luck. So, and that's where we're at in our road system. So, most of you, I'm sure, will be getting a $52 credit on your income tax on your state income tax when you go to file this year. That's a first step in returning the overcharge that you people paid in excess taxes. Until the last 3 years, legislature and some administrations considered the ending fund balance to be free money. Here we've got this pot of money, we can do anything we want to. Well, we've changed that attitude in Des Moines. The best way I know to explain it is for this year, we promised last year, at the end of last year's session, we told the state of Iowa we're going to run the state on $6.4 billion. And just because the state took in 6.7 or 6.8 in revenue doesn't mean we've got a credit card that we can go and spend how we want. That's an overcharge, and that needs to come back to the taxpayers. So one other aspect I would, it's kind of coincidental, but I believe that the tax credit's right at $52, somewhere between $52 and $54. And they tell us that the average consumer in the state of Iowa, the average person will spend $60 a year on a 10-cent increase in the fuel tax. Well, you're getting a $52 refund, or not a refund, but a credit this year. Fuel tax won't be fully implemented for 3 more years. So to me, that looks like the average Iowa taxpayer is going to be ahead of as far as paying their taxes. So, and I think it's amazing. And the thing that's really amazing to me is the people that it will affect the most are the ones that are the biggest proponents of the fuel tax increase. I can tell you from personal experience that a fuel tax is going to run depending on mileage, it's going to be $1,000 to $2,000 per truck if you're running a semi in the state of Iowa. That's what it's going to cost you per year. And the trucking companies and the people that use the trucking companies are the biggest pushers for fuel tax increase. So that's kind of where we're at. Mark talked a little bit about what they've done in the Senate as far as allowable growth, or supplemental state aid is the new term now for schools. certainty that the House will not go along with a 6% increase in supplemental state aid to schools. There's absolutely no way that we know that the revenue is going to be there to cover that. I think it's a disservice to our school districts to come out and say, well, you're going to get a 6% increase in supplemental state aid, and a year down the road or 18 months down the road, the state says, well, we don't have the revenue. That's not going to happen. I've had superintendents write me, well, what about 4%? And I said, well, if we had to do it today based on our best revenue projections, that it would be 0 to 2%. And do they want that, or do they want the assurity of a 2%, or do they want to wait until next January until we have a better handle on revenues and move forward from there? So I doubt if there'll be any kind of a supplemental state aid come out of the House this year. So that would not go to the governor. The other thing, LIHEAP, the Senate is kind of gone ballistic on LIHEAP and our conversations with the governor's office and Department of Human Services is there's all kinds of money in that fund right now. That putting $1 million or $2 million in there is just, it's a knee-jerk reaction. Not saying they won't need money, but let's wait till it gets a little closer to the end of the season and see if they're actually going to use all the money that they have. The people administering that program say unequivocally that they have the money they need for the near-term future. So the House is not going to act on that. We may before the end of the session, as the end of the heating season comes down, and if those funds are short, we will take it up, but we won't until then. So I guess for that, I probably talked long enough. We can open it up for questions. So
Just bouncing off Gary here a little bit. When the LIHEAP passed in the Senate, it was in the Appropriations Committee. It passed out of there. I'm on that committee. The minority, the Republicans offered an amendment that would actually increase it to $2.9 million instead of $2 million. But the amendment, it passed that the $2 million was going to come out of the general fund. We suggested that you could actually take money from the old Iowa Values Fund that had come in over the year. That fund has been transferred. Program's no longer there, but there are people paying back their loans. And there was money in that fund that could have been used that wouldn't have touched general fund money and actually would have made it $2.9 million without even touching the general fund. But that amendment failed, and ultimately the $2 million out of the general fund did pass. So, and it will come up again in the Senate for discussion on the floor probably Monday or Tuesday. So, other things that I was thinking about is Gary's jogging my brain over here. The gas tax in the Senate, if it does pass the House, I think it may become an issue. But the leadership in the Senate has always said it has to be on a bipartisan basis. And this is Michael Gronstall saying that if we put up, it takes 26 votes to win the Senate. If we put up 14, you have to put up 12. It has to be that bipartisan. There are votes in the minority in the Senate, in the Republican Party there that would support the gas tax. I'm not sure we can get to 12, especially in this election year, but we might get to 8 and or 7 or 8 votes out of the Senate that would approve that gas tax increase. And so it really comes to the leadership there, whether is that bipartisan enough for you or not. And so it'll be interesting to see whether that comes up. We did pass, though, this week out of committee, and again, the Appropriations Committee, which I said on, the DOT budget recommendation for this year. and that will be $352 million to the Department of Transportation, which will come up for a vote probably next week as well. So that was pretty much unanimous. Both parties. I don't think there were no votes in that bill from DOT. So that did happen as well last week. And I started doing forums already a month ago. This is either the fourth or the fifth one, I think. If you're not aware of the fact, we did do a couple of resolutions right off the bat that happened in the first week of the session. And one dealt with re-asking FEMA to reconsider how they're going to pay rural electric co-ops. Remember last spring when we had the weird snowstorm on the 3rd of May? Well, that affected a few of our utilities up here in the north central Iowa that had lots of power lines that went down. And in the past, normally, if you were declared a disaster like they were, you went ahead and repaired those and then sent your bill to FEMA and they would reimburse you on that. Well, they denied this request to 3 utilities now in the central and north central part of the state. And this resolution, which passed unanimously, is asking them to reconsider that. This would be the first time that this has ever happened. So if it goes on and stays this way, it will change the way RECs do business quite rapidly. The other one was on renewable fuels and the renewable fuel standards. That was the president was looking to back off 10% on renewable fuels, ethanol. And that also passed unanimously that they would consider their decision on backing renewable fuels back. So those were both the bipartisan bills that passed both houses and were sent. And we were off to a running start already in the first week, because that happened in the first week. So, and another comment, if you wondered how the $52 tax credit, how they come up with that number, there's a fund called the Taxpayer Trust Fund, and there's a percentage of dollars that are in surplus that are automatically put into that trust fund. And whenever it gets over $30 million, they do a calculation depending on how many people filed for their income tax and divide into that and create that tax credit of your income tax. Well, this year there was $130 million in that fund, and so there were approximately 2.5 million tax returns. You divide that into 130. I don't know if I have the math correct yet, but that's how they determine it. The money in the Taxpayer Trust Fund versus the taxpayers that actually filed a return in that year, and that's the refund. And for the next year, you have to file a return to receive that tax credit. So, okay, that's probably enough. And update, and so we can go to questions, I suppose.
Anybody?
A couple more things on the gas tax. I was down there for Transportation Day, of which you're both well aware. And I think we had the biggest crowd ever there, and certainly the most concern. I know why one Iowa Taxpayers Association guy didn't say anything in the committee meeting, because he happened to be standing by me and a couple of supervisors from northern Iowa the other day, and when he walked out, we asked him which group he was from, and he told us, and I said, "What's your solution?" He didn't have any. Those 2 supervisors wheeled on him, and we let him have it right there. So I didn't figure it, and he was that great big guy in the brown suit. I didn't
Your reputation precedes you.
Well, I just laid it, they always say we're opposed to this, but they have no solution.
That's
And
it.
without the solution, don't talk to us, The other comment they made to me in the past was, it's not our job to come up with a solution, it's just our job to oppose taxes. Well, in the meantime, we rank 38th nationally, in overall road conditions. The average age of our bridges is 69 years old. How do you feel about taking a school bus or one of your farm equipments over that? And 1 in 5 of every state bridges is structurally deficient. Now, you don't notice that when you drive down the road, but trust me, if you got underneath the bridge, you would. We have a $215 million shortfall each year in just critical maintenance in our road, and nobody is addressing that. But there were more county supervisors and engineers represented this year. There were asphalt pavers, concrete associations, a motor truck association. We had everybody at the Capitol, and they were all concerned. It's a just to do it. It's time to just do it and take care of our infrastructure. It's an economic development issue, and we need to be able to do that. So I think when this group, with the Iowa Roads Association and some of the other associations put together, there will be billboards up there, but we need to educate our public. They don't understand how old our infrastructure is. When we went to see the governor and lieutenant governor said, we went to see the pipe works here in Des Moines. Do you know we have wooden water pipes, underground in Des Moines? I said, guess what? We do everywhere. It's a good thing you guys are getting your eyes open someplace, because all of our infrastructure is falling apart. But we need to keep our road system up. So that's for everybody. We haven't found anybody totally opposed to it, other than those people that are opposed to everything, but they don't know why. So.
I don't think the public understands either that a lot of counties have bonded to fix their
Exactly.
home, and that gets put on the backs of the property taxpayers instead of the user fee of people driving across the state. And I think once they realize they're going to pay for it one way or the other, I think it'd make more sense to them.
The governor says that all the time, we don't bond for state roads. I said, you might not for state roads, but the cities and counties are bonding, and we're paying for it through property tax anyway, so think about that. So he just needs to have his eyes open. I think if you put a bill on his desk, I think it will get signed. The last time a gas tax was increased was during an election year. So it can happen, it's just, yeah.
We had the discussion in caucus this last week as well, and just from our own polling that we do as a caucus, the attitude in the public has gotten a little more favorable. It used to run in our polling, maybe 70% were against raising the tax, but it's getting closer to about a 50-50 percentage in the polling that's happened. So there's been some change in the attitude out there, whether they're for or against raising the gas.
As Gary said, if they knew they were paying property taxes for it anyway, that would change their mind. So, and if they knew how bad our road structure really was. So we just need to educate people as we go. And you're right, the $52 would pay for a lot of those. We had one lady argue at some forum someplace that she was totally opposed to it. I said, your boots cost more than what you pay in additional gas tax over the years, so. That quieted her down.
I'd like to shift gears and probably be towards Mark with the human services piece. We're trying to work through our mental health redesign thing, and we're frustrated and disappointed and at wit's end. We just received by email the refusal of our 28E arrangement. And I can't understand, to do any kind of business operation, you should have a contract to operate before you make a lot of decisions to move forward. And that's the first piece that really frustrates me. And I think our region, we're working with BV Carroll, Ida Sac, Calhoun, and Crawford. And I feel like we've got a really good group and an amicable group that can work together, but we're lacking the leadership and direction from DHS to get this done. And we're running out of time. We have, in our situation, we have to, as you guys know, we have to certify a budget by March 15th. It's just not obtainable. And for me, as a person in the charge that I have, we should have a contract amongst those who are working together to move forward to make the other 50 decisions that we have to make. And we don't have that. We submitted, finally got an email back on Monday. The letter arrived Wednesday because we've been pushing and pushing, asking for a determination whether our 28E is acceptable. It was not in one category. Actually, two. One was not significant, the other was. As you probably would recognize, it would be in the area of money.
Mm-hmm.
And
I've gotten both those emails. I pulled them in. They came to me yesterday from Mark Beardmore and Carroll County
Okay.
on what the proposal was. And then I think there's a meeting next Wednesday again.
Yeah,
And is it right here?
yeah, I'm serving as the chairman.
And so I'm going to either talk with you later or with Mark Beardmore again and try to, because I'm a proponent for the state filling in those gaps that make this starting group work together. You know, there's counties with money and counties without money, and they're getting hung up over putting all the money in the pot. Well, some have lots of money to put in the pot. Others Others don't. So I think the only answer to this thing is the state kind of equalizing that again, so that they all can operate and not fear that their taxpayers in their county are putting the bill for taxpayers in another county, which is really where the problem lies.
Oh, absolutely, and that's very understandable. I mean, but the trouble is the time frame that we now have to work with, it's not obtainable.
They're supposed to be
It's just not obtainable.
functioning, so.
And I know there are some that are working as a region. They obviously don't have a contract. I mean, they don't have an approved contract. And I have not heard how many were approved and how many were disapproved. But
I think they're all approved but this one.
Seriously?
I think so. And I see Chuck Palmer a lot. In fact, I saw him on Wednesday afternoon, and we're talking about the clawback problem. And before we sat down and said anything, he says, I think we've got your problem solved in this region that we're, Sac and Carroll and Crawford and stuff. And so they're proposing stuff now. I hadn't seen it until I saw the email that I got from Mark yesterday.
that clawback piece is a whole other
It's a whole other issue.
It is, and
Besides
we've kind of transferred to a per capita situation, which is the 4728. If they pull back some of that clawback money, all counties have then not contributed 4728. I mean, there's just multiple problems, and we're just not getting
The regional,
the help we need.
I'm on the redesign regional committee, and everybody on that committee thinks the clawback dollars, and to explain clawback dollars is that the state funds that are put into the regions, if they get reimbursed because of the Affordable Care Act, that's now going to pay for mental health costs. If they get reimbursed for that group of people between 100 and 138% of poverty, clawback says, according to the bill, they need to return 80% of those funds back to the state because they're actually getting double paid, is I think the scenario here. What the committee wants to do is for this first year, don't do that. That might solve some of the other problem on how you manage your money as an agreement, a 2080 agreement, how you're going to fund this thing. So if you knew you were keeping those funds for at least the first year, that might solve your problem on how you're going to create equity. After a couple of years, it will solve itself because everybody will be on the same footing. After every county will match up with every county around it. But right now, that's a problem.
There's a little bit of discomfort and non-agreement in the idea that there are maybe some that start with some reserve capital up front, but there are also, from the other side, those who are not donators of reserve money are going to be donators later on. And so you've got, it's just a very difficult situation. I wanted to bring it to your attention.
I'm going to be a proponent that the counties can use their reserve to make their matching fund at this point, and I think that the clawback needs to stay there. That way the region can use those clawback funds to balance it out over time and do this all by the 1st of April. It's supposed to function come July 1 is the way I understand it. So this is a problem I'm working on every day. So.
Okay, thank you.
And it's a big one.
Surely we've got more questions.
There's one right there.
You mentioned drone use earlier. I'm wondering if there's any, if they're planning on opening up drone use for commercial use at any time? Has there been a discussion about that?
Well, there'll be, yeah, and that was one of the questions that I talked to one of the people on the subcommittee about. Crop Scouts are thinking this is going to be a huge thing, and so, their solution at the moment is drones can be used over private property with permission of the landowner.
That's the only exception?
Private property owner. So, this is such a new thing that, there's a whole lot of things going to pop up as we get into this. And so I think we'll be dealing with pieces of it for probably the next several years. Somebody will come up with with an idea of how to use one, and, well, does that infringe on somebody's privacy? Does that infringe on some kind of a business situation? Are you spying on a business? Or are you trying to steal trade secrets or something? So, it's a whole new world as far as what we're getting into and the capabilities. I mean, it's kind of spooky. I can pull up a map on this thing or a picture on this thing that I can tell which one of my trucks and which one of my pickups and what of my machinery is sitting out in the open, and that's on the KTIV news or weather site. I can bring it down to that resolution, a satellite picture. So, there's a lot of things that are going to come up, and a lot of things that we're going to have to talk about as we look at drones and satellites, and we don't know with two boys in the service, they just kind of roll their eyes at the stuff that we're thinking about. The capabilities that are out there, they're just beyond imagination. And we don't know probably 10% of it, so.
Do you have a sense of which way it's leaning in regards to allowing commercial use?
I think, it's going to be with a permission of the property owner. That anything, if you are taking pictures in your neighbor's backyard without their permission, you're going to be in trouble. Now, whether that's going to be a misdemeanor or what it's going to be, I don't know. But you're just not going to be able to go out, in Des Moines or in Sac City. You're not going to be able to go out in the backyard and put a drone up and start taking pictures of all your neighbors' backyards in the block or the next block over. So there's a lot of things that got to be worked out.
Thank you.
On another note, about 15 years ago, there was a missing person out in the country south of my hometown of Vail. And we went out there with 40 people in July and walked over 3 square miles of cornfields and bean fields trying to find this woman. And we finally found her out there. She had been gone for 3 days. She was dehydrated and barely conscious when we found her. If there would have been a drone, and this is the good side of drones, that person could have been found in a half an hour with infrared technology. Could have spotted her, and so that's the good side. The bad side is the rights, the individual rights that could get walked all over by cameras flying around your community. So it's almost like the internet. There's lots of good things about it. There's lots of bad things about it as well. So it's something I think you'll have to take on a case by case basis. But I can see a lot of good in the drone, but you got to protect individual rights as well.
Would you guys like to comment on the Iowa juvenile home situation?
Sure, and that probably falls under my department more than anything. Health and Human Service. A lot of the budget committee meetings we've had in the last 2 weeks, 2 of them have been dedicated exclusively to the Toledo home, the juvenile home, the Iowa juvenile home. I asked the question, when did that combine with this state training school? Well, actually, they combined back in 1983, and they've been housing in the last few years. And here's where the problem stands: they were housing delinquent girls. They were housing China girls. China is a designation called Child in Need of Assistance, and they're not necessarily delinquent. They're just kids with family problems and maybe some mental problems. And then the third category that was housed there was also young boys that were delinquent and probably all of the above. Not only delinquent, they may have been there because they were China, designated China cases. And so there was a kind of a hodgepodge of services that had to be rendered at the Toledo home. And when they investigated sorry, I forget forget the name of the group that investigated last summer. They found in the records that there had been 42,000 hours of confinement in these cells that hold just one individual. If they're acting up or they're acting out, they may get put in this holding cell. And these are common things in not only Toledo, but you find them in other providers that may have these as well. If you think of it in school, sometimes you had to go sit in the room by yourself for a while when you got in trouble. It's something that has been used over the years, but in this case it was used to the extreme, and when they investigated and found out there had been 42,000 hours of kids being put in these holding cells, that raised a big red flag. And then they also discovered that they weren't receiving the education piece that these are kids that would be in school. Their age range there is from 12 to 18 typically we're talking about, so the education part they weren't receiving there either. And so over time the governor and HHS had been moving kids out of that facility and putting them in other facilities, and it got down to the point where there were only 20 left last summer. And then this report, when the investigation came out of all the abuses that seemed to be going on, there was one report that one individual had been in a holding cell for one whole year. And so is that good treatment? And the governor looked at it and said, no, this is probably not doing the best job. And so it came down to where it closed. The last few children that were there were removed from that facility just before Christmas. And the facility was closed by the governor. Now this week, an interesting development, there was a lawsuit over whether the governor had the power to do that or not. And the judge said on Wednesday or Thursday of this week that the governor didn't have the power to close that facility. They had a budget of $8 million to keep it open, and that the governor couldn't, by himself, go ahead and close that facility and change the wishes of the legislature. So that's where we left it on Thursday or Friday when I left the building, and it's going to be quite a topic this week and probably the rest of the session. But since the court has ordered the place to be reopened, to fill in a little bit more, there was a task force created by the governor, again, about in July, to go and examine what's going on there. They made 10 recommendations. One was taking those 10 to 15 boys that were there and put them in Eldora, where that was part of the problem, having boys in the girls' facility. Another one was taking the children in need of assistance that were delegated there, and put them in their own facility where they can deal with family problems and mental illness problems and those sorts of things by a trained staff that's been doing that for a long time. And then the third was just having a facility that would house just delinquent girls that oftentimes are a completely different problem from what the other two problems were. Those were the recommendations from that committee. And so if it does reopen, and it looks like it probably will, I think it will be just for delinquent girls, like it was originally intended to be. And the other two categories will probably follow the recommendations of this task force, which I think did a really, really good job of making recommendations of what to do there. So, but it probably will never house more than 20 to 25 delinquent girls. That's good news. It used to house about 60 to 80, or I think the capacity was in that number somewhere, 60 to 80 delinquent girls at one time. But we don't have that number anymore. And so I think in the end, they'll be getting better service, no matter whether it stays closed or it gets reopened again. But it will never be. There were over 100 employees in the end there that were only there for 20 children. So it was way overstaffed at this point, and so maybe the best result is it can reorganize now into a facility that will function for a certain group and provide the best service and education for the group that's there. So I hope I answered the question.
I'm just glad it's in DHS and not any my chair is responsible for Department of Corrections, and so we handle the prisons and all the CBCs and so on, and I'm glad that that's in DHS.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. You said, and on the surface, it would appear that it was overstaffed. If you had 100 staff and 20, that'd be a 5-to-1 ratio. What's the ratio in the penitentiary system?
I don't know if I've seen that number recently. In the prison system proper, I would guess it's probably closer to 1-to-1.
Really?
I can't remember exactly how many total employees we have in the prison system. You know, and it's a lot better than that when you throw in the CBCs and so on, because a lot of those folks are on work release and that type of thing, so, but, and I can't bring that number to mind, right, you know, the number of employees. We've got about 8,100 is kind of where we've plateaued as far as people incarcerated in the state.
But in a prison, you do have people in a cell. And it was the cell situation that was getting Toledo into bad publicity, bad problems. And the alternative to that is you have one-on-one staffing 24 hours a day. So that would require more.
That's more like a 3-to-1 ratio.
Yeah.
And you see that same ratio in a lot of care facilities,
Sure.
because a lot of times it takes 3 times the staff for every person in there.
So there's 2 ways to corral somebody that's not following established or social norms. One is incarceration in a cell, the other is somebody kind of pulling them away from trouble all the time. And then they have to have support people. Besides the one-on-one caregiver, there's got to be some cooks, there's got to be some therapists, administration.
Yeah, it's a costly business. And outside of even the realm of Toledo, you find a lot of these providers that provide mental services in these RCFs, or residential care facilities. They have that 3-to-1 ratio that they should maintain, but a lot of times the pay for those people that you have to have on staff or overnight are vastly underpaid. And they do that off of a cost report that normally is a year behind where their costs really are. So they really struggle to keep their staff, because they're always looking for a better job, because they're above the minimum wage, but they wouldn't be above the 10 minimum wage that's being proposed.
Some of these people probably work nights, nobody likes work nights.
And so that ratio of staff to clients or children is higher than you would think it would be, but it requires that, because that's what it takes to keep the whole place open and safe. Nursing homes fall into the same category. Have a terrible time finding enough staff to keep the place fully staffed like it should be. And nursing homes typically are about 5-to-1, I would think. 5 clients for every overnight. There may only be 2 or 3 nurses or nurses' aides staffing for 100 people. So that's a scary number, because you can't be every place with that small of staff. So. I thought I read the cost per inmate in our prisons in Iowa. And I don't know if you've got that number in your head, but I thought it was costing about $30,000 per inmate to keep all. Is that the number that? $31,000. Well, that's a big number, isn't it, to keep 8,000 people? But what we spend in incarceration, and then we look at schools that, and I'll have to bring this up because I need to kind of respond to a question that was given to me last week over school funding and 6%. And I kind of went to the point that, and I asked the philosophical question, do we have We have, in education, we not only have K-12, we also have the regents and the community colleges. That's all vying for those education dollars. And I'm not for closing any of our universities, despite what you might read in some papers. And they're there. The philosophical question was, if we could go back to 1885 and say, how many universities? We probably had more people in Iowa in 1885 than we do now. I'm not sure. But if what would be the perfect number of universities in Iowa? I don't know. We could have maybe gone about 2, but we're never going to go back there. We've got some of the best facilities that deserve to be here, and we need to support them. But how do we create the funds necessary to keep this all operating? That's our challenge, and that's where the fact that we've got to keep the state in a strong, viable position where we're not deficit spending, and so we can make our commitments. And when we say we're going to give them 6% growth, they're going to get 6% growth. They're not going to be cut. In the last 12 years, 7 of them, the state didn't fulfill their commitment on their promises to schools. So has that been a good thing for schools? No, it hasn't. It's really created struggles for them. So I'm for making our commitments and not running short, where we make a promise and we can't keep it.
Years ago, it used to be that 40% of Iowa's budget was spent for K-12 education. What is the percentage now?
I think it's close to that. It's about 40, it's still just a little under 50%. Then you throw on top the universities.
I'm talking just K-12 education, because people don't understand how much of the state budget already goes to K-12 education.
I think it is about 45% of it. So the proposed budget is $7 billion for this year. We're going to spend 3.5, probably more than that on the total. But I think it's almost $3 billion on just K-12 plus the university.
And I'm disheartened at that, because when setting on the Governor's Education Task Force 2 years ago, we discovered that Iowa fell from first in the nation to 26th in the nation. So when you already take
in spending or in
in
scores?
student achievement.
In
So
scores, yeah.
we're sitting here spending 45% of our state budget on education, and we're dropping in the ranks. So what's our problem?
That was the question. That was the question.
That was the
asked
question.
last week. What am I going to do about that? Well, we got to increase the pie for one. We got to have more businesses and better jobs and higher pay. Whether you get it through the private sector, or you do it minimum wage. I prefer we have more businesses paying better wages, and we increase that budget through growth in our economy.
Does that mean you're going to enforce a school start date so a lot of those businesses can stay open in the summertime to make the taxes to pay for education? That's one more
I'll let
issue,
Gary
right?
answer that.
Which links to tourism.
Yes. So you're going to get it from both angles here.
My problem is that we've thrown all this money at education over the years, and we've got nothing in return. We've got to start asking, demanding performance from our schools. And the deal is, I don't think we have those problems out here in rural Iowa. It's, we're sinking a lot of money into the urban schools, and they aren't getting the job done. And there's a myriad of reasons, but and I've got my opinion as to what some of those reasons are. But we aren't paying the good teachers enough, and the poor teachers, we're paying them too dang much. And until we fix that system, we're not going to get the return on our investment that we should be seeing.
One of the things you need to consider too is the Esac County School District is 300 square miles. The Shaler Crestline Galva Holsting is 498 square miles. So the amount of money that you send to the schools, $5,700, whatever it is per student now, about $1,000 of that is going to transportation costs alone. So the bigger our school districts get out here in the rural area, the more money we're spending on transportation and less on education.
Not the classroom now, and those things need to be approached. We need to figure out a better system. That when you got a, perhaps I don't exact number was, there's a school district in the Des Moines metro area that was growing, has been growing, and anticipate to grow at 1,000 to 1,100 students per year. And, well, this wasn't Ankeny, it was Waukee or something like that was growing at that rate. You know, our kids out here deserve the same quality of education. And as you say, when they might be spending $100 per kid or $150 per kid on transportation, and we're spending $1,000, that's, we've got to figure out a way to get around that.
Another thing is we advocate for dual credit courses, because I had a granddaughter that went to college again. I've heard this for years and years, but firsthand now know that those dual credit courses a lot of times do not transfer to those universities. And when they do, our kids have spent that time taking that dual credit courses in high school. They fight and challenge and have to appeal to get any credit at college for that. So I don't know what we're doing. Maybe we're spending the wrong time teaching the wrong subjects if you're not going to credit them anyway.
Yeah, that's, a lot of that came down to, I think, spitting contest between the regents and the community colleges. And, you know, and I'm not involved in any education committee or anything like that, but it sounds like those things are being fixed.
That would be nice.
I've started to get the message that, you know, community colleges are a vital part, and you know, that maybe that's the way that a lot of our kids are going to get a secondary or a higher education. It's 2 years at community college and then go to the universities. You know, I don't remember who it was, somebody in the Senate that didn't surprise me when they said it. We said we need to quit talking about a K-12 system and start talking about a K-14 system. Well, you know, that's a long ways down the road. But we do have, you know, Storm Lake is probably going to have the only charter school left in the state of Iowa, and that's where the kids stay in high school for 5 years, and they probably got at least the first year of their junior college paid for by the public school system. So those are the kinds of things that are going to make the system work better. And so,
Yeah, good question on that. At a meeting, we were going first and Jeff Welch talked to us. He was promoting the Iowa Governor's STEM Edition. And his claim is our education can be improved vastly if we're supposed to adopt the Iowa Governor's STEM curriculum. I haven't really been able to find out much about it since. You guys know anything about it?
you know, I don't follow that, the education stuff very much. Yeah, that's one of the governor and the lieutenant governor's big deal is, and I see it as kind of getting back to basics. You know, we kind of gotten away from the basics, and you know, we need to start teaching the basics of science and math and so on, and that's kind of where the future is. We'll see. You know, you've got these huge, conversations going on about Common Core and Iowa Core, and you know, 20 years ago, we were first or second in the nation, or 25 years ago, and now we're down the middle of the pack, and so.
He was a big promoter of it. He even showed on the bottom of the website where all the corporate sponsors that are wanting kids to stay in school. But when you come back home here, you really can't find out about it.
And I had a conversation with a president of an independent university here in the state, and asked him, you know, what's the quality of our kids coming out of high school compared to 10 years ago, 15 years ago. He didn't say anything for a long time, and then finally he says, well, we're having to do a whole lot more remedial work than we were 10 years ago or 15 years ago. The kids aren't ready for college when they're coming out of our public school systems. So we've got a lot of work to do there, but I think we've proved over the last several years that throwing money at it isn't the answer. We need to come up with some
bipartisan vote for the gas tax increase. His definition of bipartisan is 1214.
That's in the
That's
Senate
what it
side,
says.
yes.
Okay. Is that kind of go across the board as far as other issues, for instance, the education, mental health?
No. No, the other issues, when we're talking about other issues, education, mental health, in the House, you know, back when the other side had the majority in the House, and it was 54-46. If they got 55 votes for a bill, it was bipartisan. If one Republican voted on a Democrat bill, it was bipartisan bill.
That was always my understanding.
Yeah, and that's, you know, now we've got a new definition on the fuel tax. Bipartisan is a majority of both parties. You know.
And a follow-up on that, and Shirley partially answered that. On the 2%, 6% increase in the education budget is roughly how many dollars?
6% is $220-some million. No, and going into in K-12 schools.
All right.
6%. So, you know, divide that back, so every percent is going to be, what, about $60 million, 55 million, 55 million. No, that's not right. Be 30-some million, just under 40. So, yeah, and I mean, the education reform we did a year ago, when that's fully implemented, that's another, was it 160 million into the school
I
system?
think so. I think it's 160 million.
Yeah, and so, and that's why we're so concerned about the budget is, you know, last year, 160 million new dollars going into school system, 120 million going into the property tax reform, backfilling communities and counties for the changes in the property taxes. And was it reform? Property tax reform, what was the other big one last year that we did?
Medicaid.
Well, Medicaid, you know, Medicaid's another one. You know, Medicaid's going up at $120 to $140 million a year.
So instead of returning the $52 credit to us, which nobody even has, isn't missing, and the last time you did this, everybody thought it was going to stimulate the economy, but you keep that $52 per taxpayer and put it toward roads or education or Medicaid or something that needs it.
Because then you get into a situation where if we don't have that surplus down the road, we're using one-time money for ongoing expenses.
Exactly.
And that's one of the reasons Iowa's in as good a shape as it is today, because when we came in, when Governor Branstad came in, that was one of our principles. We will not spend more than we take in, and we will not use one-time money for ongoing expenses. You know, there's been, well, I didn't offer it this year in caucus. Every year since I've been elected, I offered in caucus. You know, since we've had a surplus, I said, give me 500 million of it. We'll finish Highway 20. That's a one-time expense, and the ending fund balance is gone. We don't have to worry about it. You know,
Didn't happen.
I get roundly laughed at every time I do that, but so I didn't do it this year. But no, we've got, and we did a lot of good things with that ending fund balance last year. We put 160 million, we paid off bonds early. So that's going to reduce our interest expenses. We paid off everything early that we could possibly, that the way the bonds were written, that we could pay off. And we've got some money, some of that's going into a trust account to pay off bonds down the road. So, and it's a struggle, you know. But that's what was happening during the Culver administration was, you know, we got, well, the ARA money, the federal money. It was one-time money, but it went into teacher salaries, and it went into new employees, and 3 years later, when the Arrow money's gone, how do you fund all that stuff? You know, I fought that my first couple of years as chairman in the Justice Systems Budget Committee. During that time period, they moved, what was it, 20 patrolmen off onto a federal grant, highway patrolman. All right, so then 3 years, the federal grant runs out, and all right, now, do we lay off 20 patrolmen, or do we find $2 million from someplace else to fund them? And, you know, they'd taken the $2 million and they'd spent it on something else entirely, and so now we've got a highway patrol that's at lower numbers than back in the 1980s. I mean, we'll have less than 350 highway patrolmen on the road. We've got several districts in the state. There's no highway patrolmen on the road between 2 and 5 in the morning. In fact, well, we've got 6, right now we've got 6 highway patrolmen on the road between 2 and 5 in the morning in the state line.
And if you don't maintain those, then our local sheriffs and county sheriffs come to us and say, we don't have coverage, we have to take care of that, so it's then passed on to us. I served on the 2nd Judicial District Board of Directors for a long time, and that's one of your committees. I wanted to point out to you, I think it's been an effective route to try and keep track of people as far as parole and other things that for people who are incarcerated. But one thing that we have coming up that keeps getting larger and larger and larger are the people that have been put on the control list for sex offenses, and that thing is just multiplied and multiplied and multiplied, and that's our charge to keep track of those people, and we're having difficulty finding the financial support to keep track of those as an extra responsibility. And if that comes up down the road, I wanted to point out to you that's a big thing that's a responsibility that continues to grow as far as the judicial districts.
And I think, I don't remember the exact years, but probably 10 years ago, there was maybe 15 or 20 on that list. Right now, it's at 1,100 in the state of Iowa that are on that sexual offender list. You know, a deal that I've got to do a lot, try to get to the bottom of is, you know, ever since I've been in the legislature, basically the common wisdom was that anybody committed to the sexual offender unit in Cherokee was basically a life sentence because they were incorrigible. They could not be released, you know, they'd never be released. Well, they're starting to release them now. And I've got to find out whether there was a change, has there been a change in philosophy or a change in, you know, and basically, you know, I'm going to have a hard time because once they go to the sexual offender unit, they're under DHS. They're no longer under Department of Corrections. So that's kind of out of my bailiwick. But you know, there's 2 of them have been released into Buena Vista County in the last year, and the sheriff's department gets 4 hours notice. You know, they get a call saying we're releasing this guy. He's moving to an apartment in this little town that has no law enforcement, and they're moving there because number 1 doesn't have school, number 2 doesn't have daycare center, and you know, there's nothing we can do about it. So yeah, it's going to be a huge issue, and they anticipate that sexual offender list, you know, people that we have to track is just going to keep increasing.
I'm not sure, I don't know that we've had to keep track of anybody out of the pews when needed, but we're just getting those from general sentence.
Mhm. Yeah.
And we maybe had 8 or 10, and I think we have 80 now. You know, it's just, over the last 10 years, it's just multiplied.
One last thing on the gas tax, and then I'll be quiet. It may look like the DOT is doing a lot of projects this year, but you have to remember that in 2015, the federal transportation budget will be hitting a fiscal cliff, and that's all going to change drastically if we don't take care of our own.
You know, and that's a lot of, you know, some of the argument we're starting to get against the fuel tax in the state of Iowa is, well, the feds are going to do a 15-cent a gallon.
Two.
And, you know, I'll believe that when I see it, but,
That would be like the Affordable Care Act, and then it'll be our hope and change.
There you go.
so.
Anybody have anything else? Been here for an hour and 15 minutes.
We have one.
There, you've mentioned several failed promises over the decades. I'm not pointing any fingers. And we've continued talking about how the federal government changes things which affects the state changes things which affects the county and the localities. As you've reformed the property tax, and I know that there's some backfill coming up, as one who's trying to work on local city budgets, what assurance do we have that this backfill will continue for a meaningful period of time?
Well, having a positive, a surplus is your best guarantee that we can continue to do that. As soon as we start to deficit spend, then it becomes very shaky. And whether the commitments that we made last year, and I think this is an LSA projection of the Services Agency for the Capital, is that in the next 5 years, just with the changes we made last year in property tax reduction and backfilling and education and Medicaid, that the lines between the surplus up here and the spending are going to come together in about 5 years. Then things become very difficult. Then where are you? So you need to kind of maintain that surplus.
So then are there other alternative fundings that the county or the city would have available under state statute that we could go into for the money that would have been cut back to us, which sometimes we're picking up for things that are actually being severed at a higher level of government?
That then becomes a political question.
Which is why you're in politics. Because one other question, I know that in Fort Dodge and I think other regional airports, I know this is a federal regulation, again, where we have things that are transcending levels of government. Their commercial airline service is eliminated because of new pilot regulations. Is the state doing anything to try and work on this situation?
Boy, I don't know of anything.
No, that's completely a federal.
It's a completely a federal thing, but it certainly has an impact on transportation in the state of Iowa. I mean, I know it's a completely federal thing, but is there any, I know it's a completely federal thing, but can the state at least encourage the feds to do something?
Oh, we can encourage for all the good it'll do.
Right. But I mean, that's,
I guess somebody brought up last week, you know, sometimes we don't think big enough at the county level or at the state level. And I think it was Debbie Durham that said, who would have thought that Iowa passing a resolution that put wrestling back in the Olympics would have an effect, but it did. It got put back in. So maybe resolutions that were passed unanimously by both parties sends a pretty strong message to the next level that you know, we're for changing things here. So maybe we need more of that. States need to stand up and push back probably more often than we do.
because unfortunately, once a commercial airline service is lost to a city, it's very difficult to get it back.
I'm sure once it's gone, I'm sure it is, without a lot of fortitude to get back. Be able to do that.
Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Yeah.
Yeah.